My friends, you know things are not going well when CNBC writes, Ukraine's counteroffensive has been underwhelming so far. Ouch! Even worse, the Hill mentions the words you shall not say, heavy losses. Trolling aside, after a series of setbacks, Ukraine did manage to make some territorial gains in what we call the Vremivsky salient. And here you can see a quick summary of the evolution of the battle since our last video. Ukraine gained the villages of Neskuchne, Starozheve, Blahodatne, Makarivka, as well as Novodarivka and Levadne. Although if we zoom in, Levadne is not really a village, because it's essentially it's one building. It's a farm. It's like those guys that count a kiss like a notch count. No. And here's a summary of how the attack went. At this moment, the Ukrainians more or less got bogged down in these villages they captured in the valley, while the Russians controlled the high ground. And the rainy weather of the last days turned a lot of the fields into mud in which wheeled vehicles can sink in. Now the first major objective of the Ukrainian offensive in this sector would be the capture of the strategic town of Staromlinovka, which will be used as a staging ground for the main assault on the Russian fortifications located only 7 kilometers away. And now, according to the latest reports, the battered 37th Marine Brigade is attempting to break through the Orojaine-Novodonetsk line in order to slide into the DMs of Staromlinovka. So at this point, Ukraine is 1/3 of the way until they reach the actual first Russian line of defense. But this could change if they double down and bring reinforcements, like the experienced 93rd Mechanized or 3rd and 4th Tank Brigades, but also the NATO-trained offensive brigades kept in reserves, the one of the Maron Tactical Group. Today we'll do a tactical analysis on how Ukrainians manage to break through Russian lines. And the reason they achieved this is essentially because they changed tactics. We all remember at first Ukraine launched tank columns in open ground and let them suffer the wrath of the Ka-52 alligators, which destroyed or damaged scores of armored vehicles like this abandoned Leopard 2A4. Bruh. They also made heavy use of MRAPs, thinking they're actually mine resistant. And although we can witness the involvement of so many Ukrainian brigades, many still cope by claiming,
"It's probing time."
Come on, don't bullshit me.
Here's an interesting article by the Washington Post about these first attacks titled, On Front Lines of Ukraine Counteroffensive, Soldiers Pay Heavy Price. They interviewed a 30-year-old Ukrainian soldier from the NATO-trained 37th Marine Brigade, call sign Lumberjack, and he said, within 20 minutes of their June 5th advance, mortars exploded all around them. Lumberjack then told American journalists very graphic details about what happened to the 2 men sitting next to him in the vehicle, and that out of the 50 men that went on the mission, 30 did not return, either KIA, wounded or captured by the enemy. On top of that, 5 of the unit's armored vehicles were destroyed within the first hour. 60% losses. So that's for only 1 platoon. Imagine for all the other units that were involved in this first offensive. Now instead of these cavalry charges, Ukraine changed tactics. And the infantry now does the bulk of the fighting dismounted. Platoons, that is multiple squads of 10 soldiers, will maneuver to secure key positions by themselves. Only then do armored vehicles show up in support. This process is a bit slower, but it allows Ukraine to save on their very precious heavy equipment. The failed attack of the first days had only one positive outcome for the Ukrainians, is that they managed to spot the location of multiple Russian artillery batteries, like this one that lost 5 very precious 2S-19 MSTA 152mm self-propelled howitzers that were deployed 20 kilometers away from the front. Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian War. Remember that if you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, just like with many other commentators, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped. And welcome to the headquarters. You see, Ukrainians are not that complicated. They won't bother tickling the back door. If they can, they'll just mash through the front. Let me tell you, when they saw that gap, they immediately exploited the opportunity with their best units. That's how they rushed for Neskushne with a deep thrust on the west side of the river. First of all, the Ukrainians don't actually call Neskushne a village, more like an outpost. Here's a 3D map of the sector. As you can see, there's only one entrance, flanked on the west by steep hills and by a river on the east. This specific mission was set to the 7th Battalion of Volunteers Array of the 129th Territorial Defense Brigade. They observed Russian positions for a month before the attack. Like everywhere else on the front, the Russians were expecting a large armored attack, but were not prepared for small assault units of riflemen to attack them in the dark. The turning point was when the battalion of volunteers flanked enemy positions from the hills and captured the school located on a hilltop, from where you can see all of Neskushne. As the Russians understood they were getting surrounded, they all fled from the area.
Our men are running from the battlefield! A shameful display!
And here you can see the settlement being secured by the men of the 7th Battalion Array, holding a very special flag because it's also the one of Bandera. They raised this same flag on Velika Alexandrivka in Kherson Oblast 8 months ago. Now, to be honest, reading through Ukrainian accounts of battles is always very funny. The Voice of Ukraine interviewed one of the soldiers that took part in the assault on Neskushne, and he said there were over 200 Russians there. Without exaggeration, more than half will remain there forever. Okay, so they claim to have faced an outpost manned by 200 Russians, of which half ended up KIA, while this Ukrainian battalion acknowledged the death of 6 of their soldiers. So Ukrainians claim that the defender suffered close to 17 times more losses than the attacker. Were all the articles writing, oh yeah, the attacker always loses 3 times more losses than the defender. The Ukrainians come in and they're like, Niet, it's 17 times more losses. And now you understand how ancient Greek historians reported battles. Anyway, this attack was coupled with another one on the other side of the river by the elite 68th Yega Brigade, which secured Blahodatne. Here you can see some of the troops of that Yega Brigade planting the blue and yellow flag in the village. First, some of their engineers created a path across minefields. Then mortars and artillery pounded Russian positions, followed by a hail of fire from the 50 cal machine guns of the Max Pro MRAPs. The storming of the village was carried by 3 platoons from the 68th. Battalion Commander Dolphin watched 60 of his men approach the village, guiding them using drones hovering above them. The battle was fierce, and when the Russians ran out of ammunition, they left. Commander Dolphin acknowledged the loss of 4 soldiers KIA, and using a 3-to-1 ratio, we can estimate the number of wounded to around 12, for a total of 16 casualties out of 60 men. Once again, it goes to show the amount of men involved in these battles. We're talking about 60 to 100, 120 Ukrainians. So you can imagine the size of the defending force. After this success, the Ukrainians attempted to push their luck for another such lightning raid, this time against the village of Urajaynoye, located 3 kilometers away. However, they were stopped by enemy fire. The reports only mentioned that the Ukrainians managed to disembark some groups of infantrymen in the tree lines near the village. Part 3 of the attack took part on the east side by the 37th Marine Brigade, that expanded the breachhead over the Shaitanka River with the support of the 4th Tank Brigade. Here you can see a Ukrainian tank rushing to capture Flag B, located over this Russian entrenchment, and firing at them at point blank. Also notice how the tank is used to open pathways across tree lines, which would then allow MRAPs and light armored vehicles to just cross through. Once again, the Russians use their weapon of choice, the Lancet. This one crashes into a Ukrainian T-72B3 that is getting towed. The tank then seems to lose control and crushes the Max Pro MRAP behind him as the panicking crew quickly runs away. June 11th. Ukrainians pressed their advantage and pushed for Starozheve, benefiting from the high ground with the school they previously stormed. Here you can see a squad of the 88th Battalion of the Ukrainian 35th Marine Brigade celebrating their victory in the village of Starozheve. But this is where we have to cut the BS. This Twitter post talked about a failed Russian counterattack against Starozheve that left one Russian BMP-2 and a T-80BV behind. However, beware of what you see online, because everyone recycled this information without thinking. Here's an Instagram post talking about this counterattack. And then of course we have to feed the Reddit trolls. If we actually analyze the footage, what they're talking about is simply impossible. In the video we see the BMP and the tank rushing down that road. Please pay attention to this road, the tree line at a 90-degree angle, the small river, and that house in the corner. Now if we go on the map, here's the house, here's the river, here's the road with a bend, and the 90-degree angle tree line. Meaning the Russian vehicles were clearly leaving Starozheve when they got ambushed by Ukrainian soldiers that did the same thing they did the previous day. They flanked the village and surrounded it. And then the Ukrainian infantrymen simply waited for these vehicles in that forest belt. And that's how the Ukrainians managed to capture 2 of that tank crew. They didn't have time to escape because the Ukrainians were already there. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians tried to reiterate their attack on the west flank, but they suffered heavy losses and their assaults were repelled. Here you can see how the Russian Marines of the Pacific Fleet ambushed a Ukrainian column. They had already destroyed 4 vehicles near the tree line when another column of around 5 to 7 Max Pros approached. In this footage you can see them fire one of their anti-tank missiles at the second vehicle of the column, meaning the leading MRAP had most likely already been disabled. Notice how much harder it is for the Ukrainians to attack across open terrain compared to the small grinding gains they can make by jumping from one village to another, since all the buildings can at least provide some shelter for the infantry and cover them from drone reconnaissance. The Russian Marines engaged another of these columns, as you can see in this video. The outposts were defended by anti-tank crews that ambushed the Ukrainian vehicles literally at point blank. In the end, this vehicle got destroyed, this one, this APC, and even this Ukrainian tank. Due to these constant attacks, the Russians tried to send reinforcements, but some of them were hit by the Ukrainians, like this Russian BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicle that got blown up by a Ukrainian FPV kamikaze drone. Remote minefields have also dealt a great deal of damage, like this Russian T-72 that goes off-road and suddenly hits not 1, but 2 mines at the same time, which forces its crew to abandon the vehicle. June 12th. The next day, the Ukrainians regrouped and tried to repeat the success of the previous days, this time by storming the village of Makarivka, located 1 kilometer to the south. And they did it. Here you can see soldiers of the 137th Battalion of that same 35th Marine Brigade once again celebrating their win. But hold on, let's backtrack a second. The 7th Battalion array secured Neskuchne. The 88th Marine Battalion secured Starozheve, and the next day is the 137th Marine Battalion that secures Makarivka. So now we get a glimpse at how the Ukrainians rotate their forces and how they plan military operations. But my question is, why would you rotate an entire battalion after only 1 day of fighting? And I told you, we're gonna go very tactical, because we even got a very interesting footage on how they stormed the village. Notice this road and the 2 parallel rows of houses, plus that street that is perpendicular to the houses. And lastly, the river in the background. Well, if we check on the map, the 2 rows of houses are here, and here's the river. That means the Ukrainians attacked with 1 tank and at least 6 massive MRAPs in column formation along this axis. At full strength, we're talking about 60 riflemen, and then the MRAPs dropped the infantry somewhere in these woods, as you can see in this video with the squad of 12 men, disembarking from one of the mastiffs and pushing through these bushes to clear the buildings from enemy forces. And the goal of the infantry is to hunt for Russian anti-tank squads that could be hidden in one of the houses. And Forbes immediately wrote an article about this victory. The Ukrainian 35th Marine Brigade is more than a week into its own prolonged thunder run along the Mokry Yali River. In 8 or 9 days of hard fighting, the 2,000-person brigade has liberated 7 villages, most recently Makarivka on Monday. If you've been paying attention, you can smell the BS. We know very well the 35th Marine Brigade was one of many brigades involved in the capture of all these settlements. The only thing that's interesting is that they mentioned that the Marine Brigade is 2,000 strong. In comparison, a territorial defense brigade is 3,500 people strong, since it incorporates not 3 but 6 battalions, each up to 600 troops. Essentially, once the elite units like the Jaeger and the Marines are done capturing the village, the second wave is the territorial defense, whose job is to actually hold the ground and halt any Russian counterattacks. The troops that will suffer the wrath of Russian aviation and artillery are the conscripts that sadly can be seen as easily replaceable, while the elite units regroup in the rear, reload ammunition and all this, and then go back on the attack. One report mentioned that the settlement of Makarivka changed hands 3 times that day. The morning after the Ukrainian video was recorded, apparently the village was once again controlled by the Russian fighters, and then the Ukrainians counterattacked again. Now the reason why the Ukrainian offensive has more or less stalled in this area, it's simply because Makarivka is surrounded by flat open terrain, which makes it harder for Ukrainian assault squads to infiltrate enemy lines. Meanwhile, the high ground makes it easy for Russian Kornet anti-tank crews to scout the entire area for enemy vehicles. For example, this Twitter post shows 2 destroyed T-80s just south of Makarivka. However, is it Russian or Ukrainian? Well, it's a they-them situation. One day Russian, one day Ukrainian. Because in this video, Ukrainians analyze an abandoned Russian T-80 tank in that same sector. However, in this footage, geolocated at the exact same spot as the video I showed you, a Russian Lancet strikes a Ukrainian T-80 BV tank, which is then being abandoned by 2 members of the crew. So yes, it's very confusing because both sides used the T-80 tank during that battle.
That man's an imposter! That man is the imposter!
That's because Forbes announced the arrival of the 93rd Mechanized Brigade in support of the Ukrainian Marines. They say instead of Western equipment, the 93rd operates upgraded ex-Soviet T-80s and T-64 tanks, as well as some BMPs. I mean, I feel bad for those guys. They took a severe beating in Bakhmut, and now they're back into the meat grinder. Meanwhile, on the left flank, after multiple attempts like we've seen, Ukrainian forces finally reported to have captured Novodarivka on the 12th. Here you can see troops of the 110th Territorial Defense Brigade holding a flag somewhere in that village, which is composed of 10 houses. Like that, they also captured the infamous farm of Levadne. However, as you can see from this Territorial Defense Brigade soldier, attacking in flat open ground came at a cost. We can see some destroyed T-64, some Russian BMP, most likely the site from the previous ambush. And here's another perspective of the same area. 2 destroyed Ukrainian T-64 BV tanks, and multiple burnt Max Pro MRAPs in the back. In the same sector, it was reported that a Ukrainian T-72 M1 was destroyed by Russian artillery. The 13th of June. This is when Ukrainian officials reiterated their capture of Makarivka, confirming the theory that the village changed hands many times. The more hands, the better, right? But this time it's not the Marines that recaptured Makarivka, but by men of the 23rd Mechanized Brigade, which we already discussed in one of my previous videos, essentially conscripts aboard Max Pros. In response to these incoming waves of Ukrainian assault squads, and to avoid getting flanked, the Russian 127th Division pulled up reserves along the Urozhaine-Novodonetsk-Novomayorsk line. Like I said in the introduction, there's extreme pressure on that line. If this sector was to break, the Russian might as well abandon the entire salient. And remember that none of the Ukrainian units of the Maroon Tactical Group, composed of the 46th Brigade, the 82nd Airborne, and the 71st Jaeger, elite units trained specifically for this offensive, while they haven't been involved yet in the attack, meaning the worst is yet to come for the Russians. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon and PayPal. The links will be in the description below.